What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the second album by Tupac. Basically, this project is called Strictly for My Niggas, and it came out in the winter of 1993. So Tupac, after a kind of decent debut in Tupacalypse Now, which I reviewed a couple months ago, he kind of got back on track pretty quickly and was starting to flesh out his solo career more. Now, the thing about this project is just kind of the fact that it had higher charting singles and did a lot more damage than Tupacalypse Now kind of did. It was definitely one that got him more in like the valve of being like a household name. I mean, the thing about Tupac is every single one of his albums that he dropped when he was alive had some degree of controversy around it. He was definitely one that always kind of Tupac was always kind of one that stirred up kind of interest in that type of stuff. Was always ruffling like the feathers and that type of stuff. And I just would have to say that this one, even by its album title being called Strictly for My Niggas, just kind of felt like a kind of taboo topic as far as kind of going with that sort of valve, but it just was something that kind of worked. And I do feel like this project is better than Tupacalypse Now, but it's not saying terribly much just because that was kind of a lukewarm and somewhat mediocre project. But this album is like a hair or two or three better, but it's nowhere compared to like Me Against the World, All Eyes on Me, and the 7 Day Theory and some of those type projects. I feel like those just got increasingly better, and Thug Life is obviously better too. But this one kind of keeps the Politico type stuff, not quite as like I feel like Tupac probably had more fury on Tupacalypse Now. It's not so much about police brutality, or at least not to the sheer degree as far as the commentary of like California and that type of stuff as it was in 1991. But I do feel like there is enough social political kind of commentary on here to kind of have some more food for thought. There's just some stuff like, once again, this is not a very central kind of party album. Apart from like I Get Around and maybe like one or two other songs, there's not a ton of like social kind of boppish, kind of have some beers and kind of kick back kind of tunes. There are some hangout songs, but in terms of like a full blown kind of house party, or in terms of like a full blown house party or block party or something like that, or barbecue or cookout or something of that valve, it just doesn't really have that kind of apex. And I kind of feel like it's the same complaint I kind of had where I do like Tupac's lyricism and his ability to kind of have some good kind of songwriting on here, but this is not compelled in like a sheer kind of affluence as far as being able to kind of see some stuff that actually gets you wanting to vibe. I mean, for folks who have a different kind of taste and do like these kind of food for thought type songs, it does do better justice just because Tupac touches on some stuff on here like Keep Your Head Up and Papa's Song and Holla If You Hear Me, and some of those type ones that just kind of have a lot more just kind of like spark to them in terms of like social kind of commentary as far as that kind of goes. It's just kind of more conscious, kind of early kind of Black Eyed Peas, Kanye West type stuff. Not necessarily backpacker, but just kind of more stuff that's just kind of got like a balanced breakfast kind of meal as far as that kind of goes, just within that concept. So I just would have to, but we'll get to some of these singles and you'll see what I'm talking about. Like, I do like this album and it does have some decent gems on here, but I still feel like Tupac's mid 90s albums to just stomp all over these particular first two projects. That's this kind of thing. But I do at least like the spark that Tupac had as far as trying to make a difference and try to be commentary as far as putting his 2 cents in, kind of like Ice Cube and Ice-T and some of those type people as far as that kind of goes. But so the first single is Holla If You Hear Me, and this is kind of a cityscaping jive type tune on here. It just has a very much Public Enemy feel. Public Enemy has used this beat before. I forget which song, but they used it like either in their 1988 or 1990 album, something like that. It was just a good one. It's kind of a stepping out, city hopping kind of daytime vibes kind of tune. I just would have to say it's just one. This is definitely one for kind of being out and about in the city just during the daytime. Just a good kind of summary, kind of, it's a little bit ravenous in energy. This one has a little bit more turned up, kind of irate kind of energy about it, but I do like the concept of it just kind of being weaving through the city buildings and that type of stuff. Just kind of more, very similar. It's a good 1-2 punch to go along with I Get Around, where Tupac was just kind of out and about throughout the city in some of those type moments as far as stepping out and just kind of weaving around, getting some beers, flirting with some honeys, that type of stuff as far as that kind of goes, just within that context is kind of the thing about it. So it's just kind of, I mean, these are kind of similar to like NWA and early Ice Cube and that type of stuff, but it's just kind of the concept that this is not an album that's really immersed in G-Funk. I feel like apart from like Keep Your Head Up and I Get Around, for the most part, this production is pretty boom bap and stark, just like Public Enemy and 80s NWA. I feel like this album kind of acts as if, I mean, this came out right on the heels of the Chronic, so I think that it wasn't quite as wholesomely affluence quite yet, but the stuff that G-Funk was kind of doing, it's just kind of one of the last touches of like the golden age of hip hop before, like, you know, albums like Doggy Style and Lethal Injection and some of those type tunes, and you know, stuff by Easy and some of those type folks. That's this kind of thing, but it just kind of has like some good Public Enemy type feels. Holla if you hear me. So the second single is probably my favorite of the singles on this album. That would be I Get Around. This is just a very drowsy kind of city hopper of a tune. It's a mellow kind of out on the town gem, and it's a good recreational kind of day commute song. I feel like this one's very drowsy and sleepy. It just kind of has like a very out and about kind of feel. This is a better orientation of some of the stuff that folks like Public Enemy and Ice Cube and NWA were kind of doing. This has kind of like a mild G-Funk type feel, but it's just kind of a lot more just lazy kind of. I mean, it can be spring and winter kind of feels, but this really feels like a lazy kind of April, May, June kind of summer day, something like that. I just kind of feel like warm, rainy, just kind of sluggish, just kind of warmer kind of weather, just in like a dreary kind of sense. Definitely one that you could smoke one, just kind of be out and about on, just like some kind of regular sleaze and that type of stuff. Just, you know, like the song says, I Get Around. I like how Digital Underground is on here. It's a good pair up with them. It's probably one of the more recent songs I've heard Digital Underground on, just because they kind of evaporated after like the early 90s or so. But it's a good song for all of them. N.I.G.G.A.Z on here. The rest of those cats are on here. Tupac's on here, that type of stuff. I just would have to say it's just a great song. Pretty much the best song on the album, I would have to say. Just a real kind of drowsy kind of highlight, and just a real kind of sluggish summer tune that just really stands out and just has some mild G-Funk type feels. It's one of the best beats on the album. Another one that kind of has that kind of drear towards it, another kind of sleepy sounding beat on here, is just Keep Your Head Up, the third single. This is like a very dreary kind of rainy day city tune. It's upbeat, but it's a good example of upbeat. This is the kind of stuff like when I see people make like upbeat songs and more kind of peppy, kind of like I see folks make more upbeat and kind of homely type songs in a more down tempo kind of sense. This is a good example of being able to do that. Tupac was just pretty good at songs like this, between Keep Your Head Up, Dear Mama, some of those type songs. He even did another song on like Still I Rise, which was basically Keep Your Head Up too. If you like this song, there is a Keep Your Head Up too on Still I Rise, which is pretty good. There was a sequel to it, so that's another one to check out. And this is like a real excellent song. It's charted really high. It's just a good commercial kind of gem, and just has such a dreary kind of rainy day type feel about it. It's just a good example. It's an out and about kind of song. I feel like this is another one that's kind of city hopping in like a more kind of stormy, maybe not stormy weather, but just kind of cloudy, kind of overcast day kind of feels, where it's just kind of not a sunshiny kind of day, but it's still one where Tupac just tries to lift your spirits and that type of stuff. This really works as like a dreary kind of tune, just kind of to have some upbeat and kind of more like perseverance type feel, but Tupac does it in a pretty slick way, so that's a good one. Papa's Song is the fourth single. This is one that I don't see get talked about very much in terms of today's Tupac kind of fare. This is like a social commentary kind of gem, just fathers who are kind of more like deadbeat and that type of stuff. I just would have to say it's a good peppy kind of piano beat on here, and it's just some food for thought, but some vintage Tupac. I do like the concept. I really like the beat on this song. It's just kind of mellow, and this kind of one which is just another kind of food for thought kind of song. I mean, all of these minus I Get Around were just kind of more social commentary kind of thoughts on Tupac's mind type stuff. I feel like this is a good song to kind of have for that, but if you're not kind of in the mode, if you're not kind of in the mode of just talking about like deadbeat dads or something like that, it doesn't really have much flair towards it. I like it enough to recommend it, but it's really not one I would listen to very oftenly. This would have to kind of say, but it is a decent gem on there. It has pretty solid kind of regular kind of beat, but it's just kind of one with a theme. So if you're not vibing wholesomely with the theme, or it's just not, it's one where if the theme is not on your mind, then it's not really a concept of one that has much pitch towards it. It's not really like a drinking and party song or a ladies song, so this is kind of the thing. But so yeah, to talk about the rest of this album, so there's 14 songs on here minus 2 interludes. There's 16 songs, but Something to Die For and Pac's Theme are both interludes. That narrows it down to 14. So out of those 14 songs, I would go ahead and say that I wind up recommending to you 7 plus 1 almost songs. Those 7 songs would be I Get Around, Keep Your Head Up, Papa's Song, Strictly for My Niggas, the title track, Peep Game, Point the Finger, Holla If You Hear Me, and the almost song is Last Words. So Last Words, which has Ice Cube and Ice T on here, is an almost song. It's very similar to Cypress Hill type beat, like How I Could Just Kill Men has that same kind of ingratiating kind of heat. Feels like a song that you would listen to in some irritating heat, like in July, August, something like that. It kind of has like a retro NWA type city beat on there. It just really has that same type feel, Public Enemy and NWA and some of those type folks. It's a decent song. I don't dislike this song wholesomely, but I do kind of feel like the beat is like somewhat not quite as top notch as I would have wanted it to be. I think that they would have all suited. I mean, I know that these are three Politico type cats that really have some social commentary intended to, but I don't know. It just really feels like a retro kind of. It just kind of feels like a retro kind of ripped out a 1987 kind of beat, and that's good, but I kind of would have liked a more revamped kind of production. It's good, but not excellent. I just would have to say I like it enough, but it's just kind of one where the beat is just not a 10 out of 10 to me, I would have to say. So it's a solid song, but it's just kind of one I'm more on the fence about. This would take some more time for. One of the better beats on here is Point the Finger. This has a very murky, kind of funky city type tune on there. This is a city gem, and it's kind of one where it feels like you smoked a couple doobies, something like that. This is a pretty good hangout gem. It's very busy sounding. Like Tupac has a lot of kind of busy type cuts on here that just kind of have him just not really sticking around and just kind of being more homely. So I do like the fact that he is kind of a busybody. Another song that kind of has that busy type feeling about it, or at least kind of a more, another song that kind of has like a good hangout session type feel is Strictly for My Niggas, the title track. Strictly for My Niggas, the title track just has like a dusky kind of hangout type feel about it. This is like one of the best hangout songs on this album, just where you're kind of at some spot in the city, something like that, or even at like a house party, some sort of shindig. Feels like an evening kind of after day hours kind of bop, and it's just a nice song to unwind to, I would have to say. It's just kind of a nice one. It's kind of one of the longer songs on here, but still a pretty good gem just for kicking it and just the initial dap getting and just kind of kicking back and just having the entry kind of words and just that type of stuff for just relaxation and unwinding, that sort of feel. It's just a great hangout song. I feel like Point the Finger is another good hangout song. Peep Game is a nice one. This is like a flashy kind of night city lights kind of tune. This one where you'd be stepping out just like in the city in the nighttime, where it's not necessarily a day commute, but more an evening, night kind of commute where the city lights are kind of on and that type of stuff. I feel like it's kind of one for like some social kind of town hopping, and it's just got a nice jazzy kind of beat on there. I feel like Peep Game is an example of like a more kind of retro kind of beat. This is another one that feels ripped out of the 80s, but this has a better orientation towards it. This is a better example of like a jazzy type beat that just works extremely well. I feel like Point the Finger and Peep Game are two of the best beats on this project. I mean, these just kind of have a more kind of city and hangout. These just kind of have a more city and hangout type feel about them. These just have a more city and hangout type feel about them, so those are some good ones. Yeah, so I talked about the rest of this project. So that's kind of the I talked about all the songs I recommend. So yeah, I just would have to say some of the songs I didn't enjoy on here, like there's just some kind of clumsy beats on here. Like I feel like Struggling had a pretty awful beat, and I didn't really like the rest of this project just had some kind of poor beats on here that just didn't quite stack up. Like I feel like Soldier's Revenge and Guess Who's Back and Struggling just all didn't have attractive productions. Those are just kind of ones that were just not quite as compelling. Representing 93 was kind of a mellow type beat that was similar to I Get Around, but just didn't quite pull it off as much. Kind of probably needed a more interesting topic too, as far as that kind of went. The Streets Are Death Row is just not a nice one. Just some of these songs, Five Deadly Venoms, The Streets Are Death Row. These just didn't quite have like the sheer bite. And I think what Tupac really needed was like another song like I Don't Give a Fuck, which I feel like is really sorely missing on here. I feel like I Don't Give a Fuck from Tupac. I feel like I Don't Give a Fuck from Tupacalypse Now just had like the sheer energy, and that just had like a lot of ravenous bite of songs that he would do later on, like Me Against the World and All Eyes on Me. But I feel like this album was channeled just in like, I feel like Tupac is more composed on this album. Yeah, this feels like Tupac is more composed on this album and has a lot more political commentary, but he just doesn't have like the edge. He doesn't have the thug life edge that he would get a year later, and especially with Thug Life, All Eyes on Me, and some of those type records in the 7-Day Theory. But he also doesn't have like the I don't give a fuck type attitude of I don't give a fuck from Tupacalypse Now. I feel like, that was like one of the few crazy songs on like Tupacalypse Now, but there's just really nothing as far as like a sheer kind of party starter. There is some kind of mellow, but all of the singles are just very sleepy. I feel like, Keep Your Head Up, I Get Around, and Papa Song are all kind of drowsy and sleepy in terms of the production. They're just a lot more dreary, kind of rainy, and just kind of cloudy, overcast day type tunes, but there's just not an overabundance of really turned up, like kind of have like some mosh kind of energy, just like the typical energized. Because Tupac is a pretty energized individual. He's definitely one that can get you energized with songs like Ambitions as a Rider, I Don't Give a Fuck, and some of those type ones in California Love. But there's just nothing like that on this project. This is just a lot more Tupac with glasses. If you've ever seen Tupac with glasses in pictures on posters and some of that type of stuff, like on the Loyal to the Game cover that Eminem produced, but that's just kind of more glasses Tupac, where he's just kind of more in like a book reading kind of mode, and as a result, it just doesn't have like many sheer records that just kind of have like that ravenous energy. Like I do feel like Point the Finger. I do feel like Peep Game, or at least some good city hopping type tunes where Tupac was at least stepping out and being out and about. But for the most part, this album just does not have like like the sheer kind of ravenous energy that it needs. This is like the most kind of like conscious kind of Tupac of all the 4 or 5 albums that he dropped in his lifetime. I just feel like this is the one that's the most book smart one of these. But it's not like it's it's not a horrible album. It's just a lot more kind of conscious and just kind of more straightforward as far as that kind of goes. It just doesn't have like the crazy type tunes. It's just not a very riveting project as far as that goes. But as a result, I'm going to give this album me liking 7.5 out of 14 songs. As a result, me liking 7.5 songs out of 14, basically liking all 4 of the singles plus 3.5 extra songs. I'm going to go ahead and give this album. I'm going to go ahead and give this album like a 5.75 out of 10. I feel like that's pretty good. I mean, that's decent enough to say it's compelling enough to have some compatibility towards it, but it's not anywhere near a classic. It does, I mean, I give this album credit just for being able to say that Tupac is at least a smart individual who had some songwriting. And I do feel like Tupac had some stuff to say that was probably necessary in the early 90s, just with all the crap that was kind of going on throughout the fair, that all the struggles that were kind of going on, the poverty and that type of stuff. But I just look after it. It's just not very much like a recreational kind of gem for just wanting to kind of get crunk and unwind and just have like some crunk type sessions as far as that kind of goes. I would really have to say it's just a lot more composed than I was expecting, but it gets a 5.75 out of 10. It is got some stuff on its mind. It's an intelligent album, and it is kind of straightforward, and it's definitely a presentable for the most part. It may not have blue collar tunes especially, but it does have a couple, like Keep Your Head Up is at least a decent one, and maybe Holla If You Hear Me, depending upon the right day. But I just would have to say this is kind of the concept. Is this kind of like a mildly presentable, but just kind of like it's a good example of like an early 90s album that was kind of revolutionary and centered things out like it needed to, but it just didn't do much apart from just centering things and kind of being like a trailblazer. I mean, it's a decent trailblazer, kind of like Tupacalypse Now, but apart from that, it doesn't have terribly much to offer. Just a couple gems that are somewhat worth it, but not as big an investment, I would say, as All Eyes on Me or Thug Life or some of those type ones. This kind of thing, at least in terms of a weekend sense. That just really happens to be a thing. So the social score, as a result, I'm going to give the social score like a 4 out of 10. I feel like that's kind of the concept about it, where it just does not have the compelling ones. I feel like Point the Finger, Peep Game. I feel like Point the Finger, Holla If You Hear Me, Peep Game, and I Get Around are some examples of some decent ones, but there's just not an overabundance of really songs that kind of do it with just that sheer quality. And if you don't really, especially like classic kind of vintage late 80s, early 90s, before the Chronic and G-Funk type productions, is going to hit even worse as far as like a time that you wouldn't enjoy as much. So 4 out of 10 social. In terms of the future, that's difficult just because Tupac is deceased. That's kind of the concept, but there is some more projects I'm going to get to reviewing and such, and there will be some more of these. I do eventually want to review All Eyes on Me, The 7 Day Theory, some more records like that. There's a couple more posthumous records by Tupac I want to do, but this is decent stuff. It does have some good kind of moments. Just if you look hard enough, you can find like some good city weaving kind of tunes, but for the most part, this is just a very conscious kind of album that just has like a kind of like just a conscious album that has a decent amount of nightlife that's compelling enough. So